Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this evening's guest moderator from New York Magazine and NPR's Fresh Air, David Edelstein, and tonight's guests, Michael Maren, Bryan Greenberg, and Linda Lavin.
Hello.
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 Thank you so much for coming. I love this film. I saw it, I think, before anybody, right? Before it had a distributor, before it was even finished. And I knew it was really special. And so I'm very honored to be here today. Let me start by asking you, Michael, you're a journalist who spent years in sub-Saharan Africa. You wrote a great book about the failure of aid agencies, the UN and so forth, to actually get the aid to the people because of corruption and all sorts of difficulties. And yet, when it came time to write your first film, you wrote it about a slacker, about a guy who, well, he's a fuck up basically. He can't write a book, he can't write a play, he can't write a screenplay. And I'm curious, was that a sort of earlier incarnation of you, or is that sort of pre-epiphany, or is that just something that you wanted to do for your first film, explore in your first film?
Well, I think it's what a lot of writers feel inside all the time anyway. You can be successful, you can be publishing, you can be really writing really good stuff, but at some level you feel like you're a fake. And like many writers, I at a certain point in my career, I think early on in my 20s, I was struggling, and I tried to option some books to make screenplays out of them, and I wrote for the Village Voice, which was not exactly strenuous, but a lot of fun, and had a really sort of it's rough. It's rough surviving as a writer in New York City, and so I took that and I put all of those sort of traits into another character. But when I was in Africa all those years, I never wrote about myself or wrote anything personal. I always felt that writing about something personal was irrelevant in the face of all of the suffering and pain I was seeing in other people, and I had a kind of visceral dislike of journalists who would go to Rwanda when 800,000 people were being slaughtered and write about how much danger I was in. So when it came time to finally write a film that I knew I was going to direct, I went to the personal. I dug into something that I had never ever explored in writing before.
And so was that a fair representation of you before you sort of found yourself as a journalist?
I think it's a representation of me that kind of rears its ugly head every once in a while. And
Bryan, of course, has to play the ugly head. And you have to play a character who is extraordinarily and at first irritatingly passive in the face of his life falling apart, in the face of existential decay. And I'm wondering how you sort of went about finding, I guess you would say, the dramatic arc of the character.
Yeah, that is one of the challenges of doing a movie that is such a slice of life film, and it's so subtle and so real. Michael and I, we spoke about this. In life, sometimes these huge changes don't just happen in one moment. They're gradual. They decay. And this is a story about Nathan, from Nathan's perspective, of how he starts to lose the expectations of what his life should be and realize what it is. And it's not the change, it's the moment before the change. And a lot of that is seeing that change of when we all experience this. Unfortunately, we don't live forever, and our parents don't live forever. And there's a certain point where the kids become the caretakers. And you're never ready for that moment. And this is an examination of that turn.
And of course, your mother, who has in the early stages of Alzheimer's, is played by the great Linda Lavin, who is who is, by the way, opening very shortly in a new play by the great Nikki Silver, having triumphed, I guess, 2 years ago, or last year, really. Boy, it's 2 years ago in The Lions. And I think before we talk about your character, it would be really good to show a scene of you and Bryan so we can sort of orient people as to what's going on. And do we have the clip ready? Okay. You know, when I looked back on the email that I sent you after I first saw the film, and I said what was the most striking thing in the movie was that you played that character with a woman who's losing her memory with a sort of shocking amount of lucidity. There are moments where it seems like you are more lucid than any human being I've ever met. And then other times when that goes away, and yet the interplay, the sort of almost the dance of consciousness, of memory that you perform in this film, and so subtly, I mean, it's not, you can see it's not telegraphed, is so exquisite. And I'm wondering how you went about sort of finding those beats. I mean, I know they're in the script, but as a performer, how did you find those beats?
I thank you for that, and thank you for showing this scene. It's my favorite scene in the movie. I was speaking about it today in describing the relationship between these two people, the mother and the son, and describing what I understood of the disease. I don't know how I did it, but I do know that it's in the script, and it's with this actor. So you give us a good script, and you give us a good actor to work with, and there it is. I mean, I look at this and I think, well, what else could that scene have been? With this young man who is as troubled and sensitive as Bryan gave all those qualities to that character. And that was a moment for me to be the courageous one, for me to love him, to understand me. It was a moment of strength and vulnerability at the same time. But it's not something that that I had to work that hard on. I didn't have to do any research on this. I had Michael, and Michael said one thing to me early on in this filming. He said, it's especially poignant for her to be aware that she is losing her memory, rather than someone who is further along, as most films describe Alzheimer's, with someone who's gone. She's not gone, she's here. And I love what you said about the lucidity. That for me was very personal. That for me is me, Linda, holding on to, look, I'm still in a play now, I don't know all the lines were in previews. You know, the fear of losing memory, the moment of losing memory, of being on stage in a live performance and going, what the hell is next? It happens. And it doesn't happen just with age. It's been all my life with memory. But what about the fear that this could happen? So I just go into my imagination, and I have a man who is experiencing this personally, who understands and gives me some tips about it, and then gives a script that is more than a blueprint about the life of this woman, and then gives me this actor, and so we're off and running.
There's an ever so slight feeling of somebody sending a message in a bottle, like, here I am, I'm all here now, I'm giving this to you, I may not be here soon, but this is, I want to capture this moment. That's how pure and intense it is. Was that something that you experienced? I mean, is this autobiographical? Was that something you experienced in your relationship with your own parents?
Yes, my mother does have Alzheimer's, and when I wrote the script, I guess when I started writing the script about 3 years ago now, she was in the very, very early stages of it, and she did a pretty good job of hiding it, and it was very important to her to continue to sort of present as somebody who was fine, even though we all knew that she was starting to forget things, and she was starting to confuse her grandchildren, which one was which. Yet she could hold on to sort of emotional things. I think that was a key moment for me when I realized, although my mother wasn't remembering things, her emotional connection to the world, that part of her brain was working perfectly well. And that is really the moment when I actually took pen to paper and started writing this script.
That was, you just had to sublimate that extreme anxiety that you were feeling at that moment? Try to nail down that moment?
Yeah, because it was something I had never seen before. The idea that, you know, you could have this absolute emotional clarity, and that's what that scene is. That's a scene of, you know, Brian's character Nathan. There's a lot of going on, and the first thing he does when his parents go to sleep is he turns on some old movie on the television, and he's going to get comfortable and kind of put it all behind him. And his mother comes out to turn up the heat, but then confronts him with it. Confronts him with something that he's not at that moment he's not ready to deal with. But she is there emotionally, and she's worried about the father, brilliantly played by Harris Yulin, and her emotional attachment to things is very real, even though she's losing track of what is in fact real in the material world.
I want to gesture to Harris Yulin next to you and say, as great as your rapport is with Bryan, first of all, I told you when I wrote, I thought it was his greatest performance, an extraordinary performance. Talk about, you know, in and out of consciousness, and still the sense of this giant, this sort of stunted giant, you know, trying to cope with his loss of power, his gradual erosion of power. Can you, and the incredibly pure love that comes through between you two. Can you talk about Harry? I'm sorry that I can't show you a clip. When you see the movie, you'll know how vivid this relationship is, in spite not too many words.
True, exactly. Well, that's the kind of actor he is. I think he's one of our greatest American actors. He's one of our greatest actors, and he's a good friend. We did The Diary of Anne Frank together. We played Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan on Broadway in 1996, 7, and so that's when a great friendship began, and a rapport that's unspoken. And I so wanted him to play this part, and we were so happy he was available, because when you have that closeness with somebody, another actor, you don't have to work on it. It's there. I know he loves me. I love him. And I'm comfortable with him, so we feel like we've been married forever. And we felt like that in The Diary of Anne Frank. You know, we played gin rummy on stage and bickered and fought, and we were looking for, you know, we were trying to survive. We were trying to live our lives out in a terrible time. We rehearsed for weeks in one room, a play about people hiding out during the Holocaust. I mean, is there a better, you know, grounding than that for getting close together? That adversity brought us close together.
I didn't know that. That's so funny. I know you've worked with Mike Nichols. I just read this autobiography by Lee Grant, in which he says that, which I'd never thought of, Lee Grant and I guess Peter Falk in The Prisoner of Second Avenue, they weren't close, and he had them lie down on a mattress in the dark for hours and just lie next to each other and talk. And out of that developed this amazing rapport. And it sounds like that on stage gives that intangible sense of something passing between you all the time, this current, this equilibrium that you've achieved with this man.
Absolutely. And there's an intimacy, you know, that we know in this work that we do. I don't know that other people know it who work in banks and offices, although I'm sure there's closeness and there's sexual attraction. But there's an intimacy that when we do work together the way some of us work, where we get into each other and where we need to get close quickly, that bonds you. And Harris and I are bonded in a very special way. And so we were this married couple. We improvised. Michael let us improvise that last scene where he invites me to go to bed. I remember saying, "With you?" And he says, you know, there was that playfulness too. The playfulness about losing your memory and then actually losing your memory and then teasing somebody with the loss of your memory. there's and that's in the writing, that's in the humor. Someone said to me the other day, how can this movie be so sweet and so humorous when it's so sad? And I thought, well, but that's life, isn't it? That's how we survive.
Let's see another clip so we can see exactly what you're talking about. Bryan, I did you a disservice because I didn't set up your subtext in that scene. Do you want to fill everybody in? That was not what you saw on the surface. Was not exactly what was going on.
Yeah, my character is he's a writer, or he wants to be a writer. He thinks, but he's. I'm dating another writer played by Emmanuel Shariki, the beautiful, amazingly talented Emmanuel Shariki, and she's highly ambitious, and we're in a very unhealthy relationship at the start of this film. And it begins with us breaking up, or her breaking up with me, and basically giving me the boot. And that is one of the main reasons I end up going down to Florida. So I haven't told my mother that we've broken up yet. So every time she mentions how great she is and how great her book will be, it's just like a knife in my heart. So she just keeps digging it. So I'm just holding on. And then also the relationship with my brother, played by Ben King, who was a great character actor, and he's great in this movie as well. We had amazing chemistry. I thought it was just so much fun to play with. But we have a very combative relationship as well, and it's not. I'd say it's real. And what Michael is so great at doing is he doesn't sugarcoat things. So they're two brothers that when they have heart-to-hearts, it's not like, oh, I'm there for you. I'm it's more like I give them shit back, and that's the kind of relationship they have. It's very real and honest.
Michael, I spent years, not years myself, but it's almost a year not telling my mother after a particular girlfriend broke up with me because I didn't want to bear the weight of her grief along with my own. Is that something? Can I presume that was an issue with you and yours?
No, that's never been an issue with me. That
I confess that because I thought we were going to bond, and now I've
sorry.
really exposed
Now we all know
something I
David.
never
Thank you very
wanted.
Would you want to talk about that? No, I just like the idea that there's this lack of communication and closeness with him and his parents. And so he's in this relationship with this woman who he sort of idolizes, and he makes the assumption that his parents feel the same way. And he finds out in I think, a fairly humorous moment in the film that they don't necessarily feel the same way. In fact, he finds that out a couple of times. So part of the process in the film is, yes, I thought it was funny that he kept getting needled about the girlfriend, and because his mother has Alzheimer's, she kept forgetting that she was bringing up the girlfriend. So she'd ask the same question about the girlfriend over and over and over again, and he's there like, just stop it already, please. So that was put in there purely for humor.
Your title, speaking of humor, comes from a book that I actually know and have prized because one of the aphorisms in it that I took, at one point I typed it and I put it up over my desk, was that people who are idle are far less likely to commit murder than people who are actually productive citizens. That in fact idleness is a source of greater clarity and wisdom than work, which is something that my parents never told me, speaking of which, and to this day our society doesn't tell you. But I wonder if you recall that quote. I know this is a special book to you, and what the link is between the book and the title, which is, some people might say it's pretentious, but also casts the film in maybe a different light than a more mundane title would.
I'm first of all amazed at how few people recognize the title. Once in a while, it comes up in a Q&A. Once in a rare while, when we show the film. It's a book by E.M. Shorin, and
who's a Quebec writer, correct?
He's Romanian and wrote it in French.
Oh, okay.
And
French.
But it's it's a book that I read when I was younger, and I reread, and it's sort of informed. The book informs, I think, the attitudes and feelings of the film more. Obviously, it's not an adaptation. It's a book of philosophy, and in my reading of the book, I always sort of described Shuren as an optimistic nihilist, and so that there's a kind of, he knows in despair he finds humor and joy throughout the book, and I know that quote from the book, and another one that always that I had in mind when I wrote it, and I actually almost put it on the screen once and didn't, which is something to the effect, I'm not quoting directly, but it's that most people are more afraid of living than they are of dying. And I thought that was profound, and it gave me a lot to think about in terms of writing this. And there are people who have come up to me after screenings and said, "I love your movie, but you got to change that title." And to my response has been, "Well, give me a better one."
How is that title? How does it directly affect? I know, but can you explain how that aphorism that you just said connects with the protagonist, and whether or not you used that when you were directing, or whether or not you just kept that to yourself?
I kept it to myself. I didn't really talk about the book. I used it, in terms of my thinking about the characters. Nathan's character is a character who is afraid of living when the film starts. He's not doing anything. When the film opens, he's literally stuck in a chair. And the one time there's a scene early on where he kind of says, "All right, well, I'm going to go write," and he takes his computer and he goes down to a cafe in Brooklyn. And he literally can't find a seat in the cafe. And
you put you're and Danny's friends, your wife's literary friends. I recognized Kurt Anderson is there, and
Michael Cunningham is in there, and Jennifer Egan, a bunch of people. You know what?
Jennifer Egan's in there?
A lot of Pulitzer Prize winners.
Yeah, the funny thing about that, in the script, the scene, the way it's written is Nathan walks into the cafe, and he looks at all these people who are writing in this Brooklyn cafe. It's shot in part.
All with apples, by the way.
All with apples, completely coincidentally. And he looks at all these people, and they all appear to him to be writing the great American novel, which he finds very intimidating. And initially, of course, you would populate the cafe with extras who you would get through an agency. And I really started thinking, how are we going to do that? How am I going to get people who make a living as extras to go and appear like they're writing the great American novel? And I remember thinking, I know, let's get real writers who have written the great American novel. And so there's a bunch of them, and we had a really good time. It was a lot of fun shooting that day in Brooklyn.
You had a question first.
I heard you did acting job before. So which one was the hardest? Directing, writing, acting? Then yeah. Then Brian, my question is, I love Prime, your movie Prime. You were great in the movie. So how was working with Uma Thurman and Meryl Streep? Then who do you want to work with in your future? Thank you so much.
I can answer that very quickly and very easily. First of all, I've never really acted. I do have a cameo in my own movie only because somebody didn't show up one day. Writing is the hardest thing in the world, and anybody who tells you different is crazy. There's nothing being alone in a room trying to get words on a page that makes sense while you're driving yourself crazy is the most difficult thing I've ever done, and I love doing it.
Well, the question was who? Oh, yes, working with Uma and Meryl Streep was amazing. It was a while ago, but it was still amazing. Learned a lot from Meryl, and I want to work with all the greats. I got to work with Linda and Harris on this one, and I learned so much just being in their presence, and I had so much fun on this project with you guys.
We did. We had a lot of fun. I learned from him too. His ease and his comfort. It's a wonderful thing to watch. Yeah, it's a darling.
Hi, how are you guys? I actually got to see the film. I enjoyed it. You guys had great chemistry, definitely. I have a question. I'm not sure if it's fair to ask for the director, Mr. Maren. If you could explain the beach scene when he's running past the painting and he starts to visit daily.
The beach scene of it. Well, it's hard to explain to people who haven't seen it. You know, I'll be very honest with you. That scene was supposed to be bigger than it was, and it was written for an actor who ended up not being able to do it. But it still does what I intended it to do in the film, which is there's a painter on the beach that Bryan's character talks to a couple of times and sort of befriends, and the painter gives him a painting. And what this is really about is there's a man who's been on the beach for 40 years painting, and he doesn't sell the paintings, he just paints. He does the work day after day after day after day. And he gives Bryan one painting in the end, and a little piece of that. And to me, that, you know, for any artist, that is what it's about. It's about doing it on a daily basis, and not worrying about what other people are going to think or what's going to happen or what the reviewers say. It's about doing it, and that's again, everything in this film. I wanted to keep it fairly subtle, and that's really. That's what that's about.
Also doing it preferably on a beach, if possible, rather than in a coffee shop surrounded by a lot of pretentious literary people.
Hi. I grew up with you, like One Tree Hill, Glory Road, all that. In those shows, you were always not trying to prove yourself, but you came back in Glory Road to try to prove yourself that you changed and you were still a writer, kind of doing all this. And in this movie, you kind of gave up. Was it that the character was driven by his family because he was always trying to prove himself and he failed? Or was it that you just never really wanted to push yourself because you're constantly, like in that scene where you're trying to describe it, the story you're writing, but you don't believe it yourself? So is it because you think that your parents don't care, or you just don't care yourself?
Well, I do tend to play a lot of artists. I don't know why that is, but yeah, and I think it's because a lot of writers write about artists. But in this case, I think Nathan, he is a talented writer, but he's a little misguided because he's living in fear. And his girlfriend, Emmanuelle, is also a novelist. And I feel like she shines so bright and she's so ambitious that she just sucks all the air out of the room and out of the relationship. And he almost feels like he doesn't want to write because that's her thing. So he sort of takes a backseat to her and his whole life. So he's just writing things that he doesn't really care about. And this story is about him getting centered and finding what inspires him. And he will write the next great American novel. This is just the turn, you know. He's not doing it at the moment because he's living in fear.
Hi, how are you guys? First, gosh, Bryan, I love you.
Love you too.
My question is, when was the hardest time when you were acting your character Nathan?
You know, this was a challenging film only because, you know, independent films, we had no time to rehearse. I mean, literally, like, I didn't meet Linda till, a day before we started shooting? And you see the film, the chemistry between us and the whole family is so great. And that's a testament to Michael and him letting us inhabit these characters and in these moments and not always, you know, sticking to the script and just letting us create moments as well, but under his guidance. And so I think the challenge for this was just the schedule. It was very grueling, but then I would look to my left and Linda's energy was so boundless and inspiring. Like on days that I was on my third cup of coffee before lunch, and I would look over at Linda and she's bouncing around, telling jokes. I'm like, man, she can do it. I can do this. You know what I mean? She inspired me. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I mean, it was hard work, but it was a lot of fun.
I was lucky I got to live at home. We made the movie in Wilmington, North Carolina, where I'd been living for 17 years. So I got to bring my little dog to the set. and just go down the road a little bit to shoot the movie. Our first scene was in the biggest supermarket I've ever been in my life. It had just opened in Wilmington, and it was this mammoth supermarket, and we barely knew each other. And that's the fun of acting, is pretending that you are mother and son in a supermarket picking up groceries and yelling at each other. And that's how great the script was, and that's how easy Michael was, and that's how much fun we had right from the get-go. And as Bryan says, the challenge is you don't have a long time to get to know each other. So that's what the craft that we try to develop is as actors, jump in and pretend that you do. I want to say something about that beach scene and what it means to me and why I wanted to do this movie. I was 4 pages into this movie, and I turned to my husband and I said, I have to do this movie. It spoke to me in terms of the way people speak to each other. The intimacy was in the writing. The relationships were in the writing. And that beach scene, to me, when I read it, I thought, it's the Jewish Siddhartha. It
is.
It just felt like that. Finally, we understand that when you get to the top of the mountain, when you finally toil and struggle for the answers, there are no answers except waking up in the morning, making the bed, and doing your life a step at a time. And that clarity he gets on the beach from that man, and then he's going to be all right, and she's going to be all right. They're going to be all right a day at a time, and that's the best any of us do. And that's the hope that you've written and directed and created in this movie for all of us.
Yeah, and can I just mention too, on the subject of the book, I didn't read the book that you were inspired to write this on, but the theme of decay, it feels like this. It's the decay of all those things. It's a decay of your idea of who you want to be and who you should be, what kind of work you should be doing, the kind of person you should be dating, the kind of son you should be, and it's just the decay of all those ideas in that beach scene. It's Nathan learning to just accept the moment, accept his family for who they are, accept him for who he is, and it's the beginning of that change. So it's the decay of those expectations, I think.
This is why so many of us Jews turn to Zen Buddhism.
It's true.
At a certain point, when we don't meet
sense.
our parents' expectations from fame and fortune, we become great Buddhists. That seems like a fantastic note on which to end this. I just want to say, Bryan, I suspect that a lot of writers, I suspect you play a lot of writers because many writers wish they looked like you and could pick up beautiful women, and that's so you're sort of this fantasy figure. Linda, I grew up with you, obviously, before I went to the theater, seeing you in a great sitcom, and it's been, every time I see you on screen or on stage, I just can't believe how subtle the effects, how powerful, but how subtle the effects. It's weird when you bond with someone via a sitcom to sort of get that out of your head, and you amaze me every time. And Michael, I just wish you the greatest good luck with this movie. It's wonderful.
Thank you
and you
so
all have
much,
to see it.
David.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.